Hello, everybody. So, we are continuing our series, Discovering God Through the Old Testament Stories. And this week, we are going to do the final part of the lesson on Joseph the Dreamer. So, we looked at Joseph the Dreamer last week. And just to recap, go ahead and watch last week's part one if you missed it so that you can be caught up before you watch part two. But last week we saw that Joseph had two dreams from God that revealed Joseph's purpose. Remember the dream he had? The first dream was where his brothers had bundles of grain, and his brothers' bundles bowed down to Joseph's bundle of grain, which stood upright. And then the second dream was where the sun, moon, and 11 stars, which I think represents his brothers, bowed down to Joseph. And this made Joseph's brothers just even more jealous and angry with him because they already hated him because he was their father's favorite son. And now he's having these dreams from God, and bragging about him like he's the chosen one. So now they hate him even more, and because of that, Joseph's brothers sold him to slavery. So Joseph, in his journey, went from slavery and even then to jail for a false accusation. But we saw that wherever Joseph went, he had God's favor and was successful. Just like he was his father's favorite son, when Joseph went into slavery for Potiphar, Potiphar favored him so much that he made him ruler over his entire household. And when he went to jail, he was favored by God still and was put in a leadership position. So wherever Joseph went, God's favor followed him. God was faithful to fulfill that purpose in his life, and he always was successful in whatever he did. So up to now, Joseph is in prison, and he's been in prison for over 2 years. And it says, can you imagine going to jail for something you didn't do? It's bad enough to suffer consequences for something you did do, but to be innocent and locked up in jail, when you had all this promise, when God gave you those dreams, and Joseph is having a tough time. He went from slavery to jail, and he might ask, where is God? What about the dream he gave to Joseph? So keep that in mind as we continue on his journey. Joseph had a deal with the chief butler. So remember, last week, Joseph met two men who worked for the Pharaoh. One of them was the chief butler, and they both had dreams. And Joseph interpreted the dream of the chief butler because remember, Joseph has a gift with dreams. And his deal was, he told the chief butler, since I have explained your dream to you, do me a favor, and when you go back to your former position to work for Pharaoh, remember me so that I can come out of jail. But the chief butler did not remember Joseph, and he remained there for 2 years. But then Pharaoh had a dream. Oops. Then Pharaoh had a strange dream, and he couldn't find anyone to interpret his dream for him. The chief butler hears about the dream, and then he remembers Joseph, who is still stuck in jail. Joseph is called to go before Pharaoh and explain the dream. So I'm going to start reading from Genesis chapter 41, verse 15. And it says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it. And then Joseph said, I am not able to, Joseph answered Pharaoh. It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Joseph is expressing humility here, and instead of taking credit for himself, he gives God the glory, which is what you should do, because it is only a gift of God that Joseph has the gift to interpret dreams. So he says God will give the interpretation. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile when 7 well fed, healthy looking cows came up from the Nile and began to graze among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly, very sickly, and thin, came up. I've never seen such ugly ones as these in all the land of Egypt. Then the thin, ugly cows ate the first 7 well fed cows. When they had devoured them, you could not tell that they had devoured them. Their appearance was as bad as it had been before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I had also 7 heads of grain, plump and ripe, coming up one on one stalk. After them, 7 heads of grain, withered, then thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up. The thin heads of grain swallowed the 7 plump ones. I told this to the magicians, but no one can tell me what it means." So here's Joseph's going to interpret the dream. So the remember he had the 7 ugly cows and the 7 well-fed cows. The 7 ugly cows ate up the well-fed cows. So Joseph is going to interpret it, and he says Pharaoh's dream means the same thing. So both dreams, God is saying the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So he's saying that God has shown Pharaoh what the future is, what is going to take place in the future. The 7 good cows are 7 years. So 7 good cows represent 7 years, and the 7 ripe heads are 7 years also. And the 7 thin, ugly cows is also 7 years. And the 7 worthless, scorched heads of grain is also 7 years. So the 7 good cows and the 7, it says, the 7 ripe heads of grain, that represents 7 good years, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of abundance that the land is going to have. And then the other 7 years is represented by the thin, ugly cows, and that represents 7 years of famine. So they're going to have 7 years of abundance where they're going to have plenty and they're going to have overflow. And then they're going to have 7 years after that where there's going to be famine in the land. And verse 28 says, "It is just as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do." Okay, I'm going to skip down to verse 33. "So now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the harvest of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance." So basically, Joseph interprets the dreams for Pharaoh, and then God gives Pharaoh some wisdom and says, this is what you should do. Set someone over in charge of the land of Egypt and have your overseers take from the 7 years of plenty where you have abundance, since you have overflow, take from that and store that away to prepare for the 7 years of famine. That way, when 7 years of famine comes, you already knew in advance because God showed you, you will be prepared and you won't lack anything. So 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. And as you can imagine, Pharaoh is well pleased with Joseph. So Pharaoh makes Joseph ruler over all of Egypt. This is Joseph's big break. Remember, he was a slave. He was sold to slavery and betrayed by his brothers. Then he was sent to jail after being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. And after sitting in jail all those years, He's now being made ruler over all of Egypt. So it says in verse 37, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's spirit in him? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as intelligent and wise as you are. You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only with regard to the throne will I be greater than you. So basically, Joseph is the second in command in all of Egypt, second only to the king. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I am placing you over all of the land of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in fine linen garments, and placed a gold chain around his neck. So he's getting the superstar treatment now. And the Pharaoh even gave him a wife, and Joseph went on to have children and a family of his own now. So he's really come up, and after all those years through that journey he had after being sold by his brothers into slavery, he is finally seeing his dreams start to come to fruition. And he gets the superstar treatment. The king or the Pharaoh takes the ring off of his own finger and puts it on Joseph's finger and clothes him in fine garments and gives him a wife. And it says that he had Joseph ride in his second chariot, and servants called out before him. So he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but no one will be able to raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt without your permission. So Joseph rises as ruler over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Now we're going to see what happens when Joseph's brothers visit Egypt. Now remember, it has been years and years and years since Joseph was first sold to slavery by his brothers. He has not seen his brothers in all those years, and nor has his brothers seen him. So let's see what happens when his brothers go to Egypt looking for food because they are suffering from the famine. It says, I'm starting at chapter 42, verse 1, and it says, When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you keep looking at each other? Listen, he went on, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we will live and not die. So people are coming from different areas to buy grain from Egypt because they hear Egypt has so much plenty. It says the sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all its people. His brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. So interesting. Remember Joseph's dream with the bundles of grain, how his brothers' bundles of grain bowed down to his, and how he had he was rebuked even by his father for suggesting that he would be ruler over all of them. And now you can see that dream is starting to come to reality because his brothers come seeking food from him, and they bow down their faces to the ground before Joseph. But they don't recognize him yet. They don't recognize him as his brother. So Joseph speaks to them and says, where do you come from? He asks. From the land of Canaan to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the weakness of the land. No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food, they said. We are all sons of one man. We are honest. Your servants are not spies. No, he said to them, you have come to see the weakness of the land. But they replied, we, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living, which is Joseph. So basically, he said they have one brother that's no longer living, which is Joseph. They assumed and they think that he's dead. And it says, then Joseph said to them, I have spoken, you are spies. This is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. So here's what happens. Joseph gets emotional seeing his brothers after all these years, but his brothers don't recognize him because of his disguise. Joseph accuses them of being spies and makes them prove their honesty by leaving one brother behind and making them go get their youngest brother, which is Benjamin. Joseph gives them money and provisions for their journey. So Joseph commands his people, say, hey, give them their money and pack provisions for them and send them on their way. So Joseph sends them back to get their other brother. And the brothers believe God is punishing them because of what they did to their brother Joseph long ago. Now remember, they think Joseph's dead and they don't realize that Joseph is the ruler who they just spoke with. And you can see that they still have that guilt, and that after all of these years, they're still plagued by that memory of selling their brother off to slavery because they think that they're being punished for it now. And so you can imagine how Joseph is emotional because he's got all this pent up, feelings from what he's been going through all of these years through his journey. And now he's seeing his brothers for the first time. But so what he does is he treats them harshly and tells them to go back and get their brother Benjamin. And so the brothers make a second trip to Egypt. This time they bring Benjamin with him. And we're actually going to watch a video clip of this final part of the story. But you're going to see here that Joseph sets up a final test for his brothers. He frames Benjamin, who is now the youngest brother and their half brother. And he is their father Jacob's favorite now. Remember, Joseph was the favorite, and now their father has found a new favorite son. But he frames Benjamin to see how his brothers will respond. And Joseph, we're going to see, gets really emotional, so emotional that he orders all of his staff to leave at once because he can't control himself anymore. And then we're going to watch as Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. This is a big moment after all of these years being sold and betrayed by his brothers. Now he has a chance to reveal himself to his brothers. So we're going to watch and see what's going to happen.
Take you into my home, and this is how you repay me? By stealing?
We wouldn't steal from you. We'd never do such a thing.
And now you insult me by lying.
What?
One of you has stolen from me. Benjamin. The favored one.
I didn't take it.
Arrest him. For what you have done, you will be punished.
Put it in there. Ow, stop. Take me instead. I beg you.
No.
Take me.
Take me. Take me.
No, you can't. Take me.
Take any of us, Your Grace. But please, let the boy go.
You would sacrifice yourselves for a half-brother who's spoiled by your father?
Yes.
Why? Why should you care if I take him? Beat him, make him a slave.
Because I will not make my father suffer. Again.
Again? What do you mean, again?
Our brother was not killed by wolves. We were blinded by jealousy and sold him into slavery. For 20 years we have lived with that guilt. We can't go back without the boy. My father could not bear it a second time, and neither could we. If anyone is to be punished, it should be us.
I will not harm any of you, or our father. I am your brother, Joseph.
Joseph. I can't believe you get here. How can it be? Joseph.
I have so much to tell you. So many questions to ask.
Joseph. Can you ever forgive us?
I already have. Can you forgive me for thinking I was some miracle from God?
But you are a miracle. God sent you to save our family and all of Egypt. And you did.
Oh, Sanat, please, I'd like you to meet my brothers. Welcome. You will join me here. All of you, with your families.
So we saw in Joseph's story from the beginning how at the end, God actually fulfilled the dream that he gave to Joseph. And it did come to pass. Joseph did rise as ruler, and his brothers did come to bow down before him. And Joseph was placed in a unique position, and he did fulfill God's purpose for him and saved his brothers and his family because of the position that he was placed in. And so we can learn a lot from Joseph's story. And we learn that no matter how long and hard and twisted the road becomes, God is faithful to carry out the vision or dream that he gives to you. We also learn and see that Joseph had a choice. He could have boasted in front of his brothers and sought revenge. He could have, had his head held high and just acted, high and mighty. Like, look at where I am now. Look what you did to me. But he chose forgiveness and humility. And we should remember that and do that as Joseph did. Show forgiveness against our brothers and sisters and people who have harmed us. And no matter what happens in your life, remember God's plan for you. All things work together for the good of those who are called according to God's purpose. That's in Romans 8:28. And I think it was Joseph who said, you meant it for to harm me, but God meant it for good. And all of those things that happened in his life was designed and orchestrated by God to bring him to that very moment. And God's favor will follow you when you live righteously for Jesus Christ, just as Joseph did. So what's your favorite part of Joseph's journey, and what did you learn from it? And how incredible it is that he went from slavery to prison to being made ruler over all of Egypt. And my final message, I wanted to offer congratulations. NOTBC wants to congratulate every student who worked hard through this difficult time to progress to the next grade level. We know it's been difficult and hard. It's been weird having classes online instead of being in school. I know a lot of you missed out on a lot of activities, especially seniors who maybe missed their prom. You maybe missed school dances and having a graduation ceremony and a lot of things that people look forward to at that time. But It's all going to work together for your good, just like we learned in Joseph's story. And we want to say congratulations for everybody from kindergarten to college. Congrats on your accomplishment and continue to work hard. Remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. And that's in Philippians 4:13. So congratulations to everybody who graduated. And finally, I want to offer an opportunity to receive salvation to anybody who has not done so yet. Have you believed on Jesus Christ yet? If not, you can say this prayer. Repeat after me. Father, I come to you today. According to your word, I believe in my heart and confess with my mouth that you raised Jesus from the dead. Come into my heart. Save me today. Send your Holy Spirit to lead, guide, and comfort me. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.